Good afternoon. Welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission special meeting for Thursday, June 14th, 2012. Can we please have a roll call?
Commissioner Zajamian?
Present.
Chan? Dentler?
Present.
Yao?
Present.
President Armenian?
Present.
Item 2, introduction of GWP Interim General Manager Steve Zern, Scott Ochoa.
Before we move to that agenda item, I'd like to suggest, with the concurrence of my colleagues on the dais, that we will limit public comments to 3 minutes today. We do have a hard stop at 5, both because staff has another meeting that they have to get to, and I believe we also lose the room. So in order to make sure we have enough time to get through all our agenda items, I'm going to go ahead up front and say that the oral comments will be limited to 3 minutes today. Thank you. Mr. Ochoa, welcome.
Thank you, sir. And thank you to the Commission. We wanted to spend just a little bit of time today talking about the transfer from the electric fund to the general fund, because that is something that has come up repeatedly. And in my experience, it's best to throw everything onto the table and allow folks to make up their minds and at least speak from...
If I may, we are on a different item of the agenda. Which
Item
is
2A.
introduction of Mr. Zern.
See, I'm loaded for bear, so we could do both.
Let's back up.
To my left is this guy named Steve Zern. Thank you very much, Ms. Gutierrez. We are in the midst of transition with GWP. At this point, in order to get the utility where I believe it needs to be, and based on a host of factors, but chief among them is the need for strong management, strong fiscal control, and a desire to ensure that GWP is fully integrated into the rest of the municipal organization. I have made the selection, the council has ratified the selection of an interim general manager in the person of Mr. Steve Zern. Steve comes to us really by way of a career of public service in Glendale. For 25 years he's been with this organization. For a number of years he has headed up the Public Works Department and has demonstrated his frugality, his love of Glendale. The guy bleeds Glendale green. And his ability to lead and marshal resources and staff power. I do believe that pending a number of assessments that he will be providing to me, that he will be best positioned to lead GWP into the future as we further evolve both as a premier municipal utility, but also one that is run efficiently and fiscally sustainable. So I give you Mr. Steve Zern.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Commission. It is an honor to serve in this position and to also be here in front of you. And the staff has been absolutely fantastic. I am on a whirlwind tour of facilities and meeting folks, and the staff, as I said, has just been phenomenal. I think this city, Mr. Ochoa, the council, you as the Commissioner should be very, very proud of the individuals, the men and women who go out every day and ensure that there's safe, reliable water and power in this city. It's a great group. We have a lot of work ahead of us. We got a little bit of a hole that we're in, and we need to dig ourselves out of that, and I plan to do that and do it in short order. We need to get back to the business of running a sufficient, a self-sufficient, and financially secure utility, and I fully expect that we're going to be there in a very short time. So thank you for this opportunity.
If I may ask a few questions, which I'm sure will be on the public's mind, so I'll represent the public here and ask those questions, and you tell me what you can answer and what you can't answer today, and then I'll open the same opportunity up to my colleagues. You mentioned, Mr. Ochoa, that you have asked Mr. Zern to do some assessments. Could you elaborate in terms of what those assessments might be?
A few different things. Primarily looking at staffing, staff capacity, the capital plan, and really helping to lend an eye towards the prioritization of what is absolutely critical that needs to get done in short term, juxtaposed to our financial condition, long-range financial perspective, and bonding capacity, and then lastly, just an operational management overview. Let's understand where we are as a utility, for better or for worse, and I suspect for the better. GWP is filled with solid employees, people that want to be here, that want to do well for the community. I think the question is, how do we best marshal and utilize those resources? He'll be giving us those 4 assessments over the next 90 days, and I'm happy to share those with the Commission as they come available.
That would be great. My second question has to do with, you mentioned that this is an interim appointment for now. What is the timetable that you foresee in terms of making whatever arrangements to finalize whoever the final general manager may be?
I think at the end of the 90-day period, and we're almost through the first third of that now, a short time thereafter to evaluate some of the findings that will be reported, to be able to either make permanent the appointment that we have here with Mr. Zern, or to seek out a different opportunity. But at this point, what my commitment to Steve has been is for him to give me his best shot as the interim person. What does he truly believe before he ever were to assume that position on a regular, ongoing basis? That way, if ultimately he decides that the situation at GWP is best served by somebody from the outside or from another employee, that he has that flexibility. I have no doubts about his abilities to lead this organization, but I want to make sure that I put people, as city manager, I put people in positions where they can be successful. So I would think that if we look at the first 90-day period, a short period of time thereafter to evaluate information that is forthcoming from his review of the utility, and then whatever time is necessary to make an actual formal appointment of either Mr. Zern or anybody else.
It would be great if we could be, as a commission, kept in the loop of whatever that assessment is. Maybe we could have a discussion at the end of that 90-day period to mutually review what those findings are, and then obviously provide you our input and our assessment from the commission's perspective. That would be most appreciated.
That perspective would be appreciated by me as well.
Are there any concerns you have in this interim period in terms of Mr. Zern being able to wear 2 hats and being able to effectively manage 2 large organizations?
That's a great question, and I think the short answer is no, and I think it's a function of why I have tasked Steve with this interim assignment. In his years at Public Works, he has so created an organization that can operate for a period of time with his focus divided among other priorities, that I think it speaks to his management acumen. People in his organization know what their job is, know how to do it, know that they will be held accountable, know what the expectations are and the deliverables are, and I think he can bring that same level of focus to GWP. The charter requires us to have a water and power utility and a public works department. So even if Mr. Zern were to transition over into the role of general manager, we would not combine simply the 2 departments. We would have a structure that features the 2 departments and maintains them as separate entities. However, if it's decided that ultimately we want to move in a direction where if Steve is the ultimate final selection as the GWP general manager, and we want to go out to recruit a public works director, then we can do that as well. But I think that is a decision that will evolve alongside of what we think the staffing needs, both for GWP as well as for the Department of Public Works and for the city's management team overall.
Thank you. I'd like to open the opportunity if there's any questions from my colleagues.
I don't have any questions, but I just want to officially welcome Mr. Zern to the GWP family. And from your background and just speaking to you briefly in your meeting, that I'm confident that you will make a fair assessment and seek a path forward for GWP, where I think it will be, whatever the finding will be, that it will be for the good of GWP and for the city in general. So welcome aboard.
And I believe each of the commissioners have individually met with Mr. Zern. Is that correct? Right, to have introductions as well as to have some initial discussions and share some of our perspectives going into the job, so that to help Mr. Zern be as effective as possible in this 90-day period.
I have procedural questions. Did you have anything? I guess one may be directed best to the city attorney. I'm not sure. Welcome, Mr. Zern. It was a pleasure meeting with you the other day. The 90 days, the 90-day period for the interim position, that was something directed by City Council? Or how was the 90 days selected?
When the transition was made at that time, what I brought forward to council was a proposed 90-day period of time. Nothing magical about 90 days. It could have been 60, could have been 120 days. As I talked with Steve, however, about what amount of time would be appropriate to get a meaningful assessment of the utility, we arrived at 90 days. The council did bless that.
So I just want to know just the bottom line procedural. I understand that's what you think is going to be sufficient time, and that was the ballpark. I understand that, but is it set in stone? Did council act on that? I'm sorry to reveal my ignorance on that. Did they specify 90-day period?
I don't believe so. I think, as I recall, the action from council was just to ratify the appointment of an interim. So the short answer is no. There's no set 90-day cap.
So were there to be a search to fill the permanent position, there's actually no time frame in terms of at 90 days the interim position ends and we turn it into a full-time permanent. There's actually no time frame that the council specified.
I believe that's correct, because if we did go outside, it could be a 180-day interim assignment while we recruit somebody else.
Right. And my questions are just to understand the formalities and how we came up with the 90 days. 90 days strikes me as a very short period if there were going to be any recruitment process.
Speaking as someone who's only been here for 6 months, I can tell you it's extraordinarily brief. Yeah.
It's extraordinarily what?
Brief.
Brief, yes, especially if there was to be a search of any kind for either department head. So thank you for that. And then also procedurally, I wanted to ask the city attorney to refresh our recollection as a body of commissioners. What, if any, jurisdiction does this commission have concerning selection of the general manager?
Commissioner Dentler, this commission wouldn't have any jurisdiction over appointment of any city employee, including general manager of Glendale Water and Power. Your role is as set forth in the municipal code, and that's to review the operations of Glendale Water and Power. So certainly I think it would be appropriate if you had recommendations related to Mr. Zern's findings in these 90 days for ways to better manage or operate the department, but not the appointment of the general manager.
Okay, thank you. And then would that also pertain to, for instance, if members of the public were wanted to communicate to our commission in the meetings that we'll be holding over the 90 days, or at the meeting that we will hold to receive or comment on the assessments, the findings, I will decide as we go along, and that will be in the purview of our president as he's chairing those meetings. But just so I can remind myself, if the public has concerns about the process by which the interim position becomes the permanent position, or it wants to have public input, we're not really the body to receive that input, if I'm understanding, because we don't really have any jurisdiction over any specific personnel matter.
Correct.
Okay. So our comments as commissioners and the public comments to us as commissioners would be most usefully framed in terms of our input into the findings that Mr. Zern's going to be making and any general concerns we or the public have about management of the utility.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Last question might also be for the attorney, forgive me, but maybe Mr. Ochoa knows, because I heard Mr. Ochoa state, correct me if I'm wrong, if Steve decides the utility is best served by having someone else, which to me, I hear that as Mr. Zern will decide if he wants to be the general manager of the utility. Isn't structurally that up to the city manager, and is that ratified by council?
It is, the appointment is, would be my selection, ratified by council. They do have the approval of the selections that I would put forth for different departmental director leads. When I say that Steve would be able to advise me if he felt he could make the difference, a positive difference in the department. In my experience, I don't ever want to put somebody in a position where they don't think they're going to be successful.
I understand, and that's the way, that's the nature in which you were
Correct.
speaking. Okay.
Yeah.
And on the final question, I'm sorry,
Final.
so much time. Final. When you say the charters require both departments be maintained, they won't be combined, and that, I think that would be contrary to the charter. You might or might not be seeking a new general manager for the Public Works Department. That's not in our purview, but am I understanding you correctly that it's possible that we will go into the future with one individual running both departments?
I think that's a possibility.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
And I think what we'll do later on in the agenda, when we get the agenda forecast, we can put something on in the 90-day mark just to flag and reserve the time for the opportunity to hear what the assessment will be. And then we can always adjust that at a future meeting depending on how you're progressing with that assessment. If Mr. Ochoa will bear with us, I'd like to get through the consent items on the minutes, and then after that, I would like to adjust the order of the agenda and jump to the transfer allocation, which Mr. Ochoa is so eager to speak about. And then we'll go back to the top of the order from there, if that works with everyone's schedule. So let's go to next item.
Item 3A, approval of the May 7, 2012 meeting minutes.
Yes, Mr. President, I did submit some edits that was updated, so I have no further edits besides those as part of the budget item from the last meeting, and also for the general forecast. So those were updated.
Okay. Any other commissioners have anything to add to the minutes? Okay, if not, we do have a public comment for 3A, Mr. Herbert Milano. 3 minutes, please.
Maybe even longer. Yes.
Thank you very much. May I have...
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Can we reset the time to the top of them?
Commission President, members of the Glendale Water and Power Commission, and staff, my name is Herbert Milano. For several years, I have been making a recommendation that the minutes of the Glendale Water and Power restore at least some of the comments that are being made by the public. And I want to direct your attention to the item 4A, where my name appears here as one of the speakers concerning the safety report. And since this is an agenda item, we have a chance to discuss this item. Do any of you recollect the topics that I brought in for this particular Monday, May the 7th meeting? You see, without addressing and without having documentation on these minutes, and you did not, by the way, discuss or give me any feedback when I made the presentation on the 7th. So I'll give you some recollection of what I talked about. I talked about the allocation of workman compensation and how it is presented on the Glendale Water and Power reports, how the interim funds that are generally assigned to in the budget to human resources should instead be distributed properly so that we know for this department what are the actual internal service funds that are being allocated properly. I also talked about the danger to staff or the risk that there might be in case there's a power plant, because the power plant is very old, and what are the risks that the employees are being placed in by having essential elements of the electrical utility that may put a lot of employees in danger. There were no comments being made by this commission. There is no documents or input information being put on the minutes. So the only way that the public will ever get to know that these issues were raised is by going through the website, identifying the video, collecting the video, taking excerpts from it and somehow distribute it to individuals who are capable of basically reading that kind of information or viewing the information. So we have a method in which the input that comes from the public to you, basically we're totally silent. I cannot grab information from here, distribute it to 100 people that may be interested, individuals that I want to engage to take part in this democratic process. I made some comments on oral communications. Comments having to do with cost and the way that most companies and organizations present cost. Cost with regard to, let's say, labor cost or direct cost per megawatt hour. Or you could do it, according to the number of per acre feet in a consistent way. I mentioned that. There's nothing in the minutes that says that. And the only way to basically promote an idea that is used throughout industry is gone for the public because it doesn't appear in the minutes. Thank you.
I will point out that, we did discuss this issue, and we did make a decision as a commission to remain consistent with the same practice that City Council follows on this issue, which is that the minutes would not be a congressional record, meaning word for word what was spoken about, even for commissioners who speak there. It is not a word for word transcript. There is video online if someone wants to see the actual proceedings, and that's the practice that we decided to follow. So with that, I'm not dismissing your concerns, Mr. Milano, but that is a decision that the Commission made, and that's the decision that stands for now. Any other comments or changes to the minutes? If not, can I have a motion?
So moved.
Approved. Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next agenda item, please.
Item 3, consent items. I'm sorry, item 4 will be a consent item.
Actually, I believe that we're going to move to
We're going to
item
jump
5B.
to 5B. Yeah.
Item 5B, departmental transfer allocation. Ochoa.
After I've gone and thrown everybody off kilter. My apologies. But as I had said, or started to say previously, there has been a lot of discussion about the electric transfer from GWP Electric to the city's general fund. And I do believe that the best way out is through, and so in that vein, what I wanted to do is be able to provide a little bit of perspective with respect to how we got to where we are today, and what we are doing on a going forward basis. I can tell you first and foremost, however, that the City Council is concerned about the transfer, is focused on reducing the size of the transfer, but doing so in a way that makes sense for the organization and for the community with respect to all the different service levels that comprise the city of Glendale. I will not at this point talk a great deal about the city charter or about in detail about the rate increases. The city attorney's office is preparing a memo for City Council, has prepared a memo for City Council relating both of those two items. As the council digests all of that information, my expectation is that they will be providing that to the public and certainly to the Commission so that you can digest that information well in advance of any discussion with respect to rate increases and potential bonding for the future of GWP capital improvement projects. So with that said, by way of the historical perspective, in 2000-2001, the sales, as noted for GWP Electric, were $119.98 million, and the transfer at that point was $10.8 million transferred to the general fund, offset by transfer as well from the water fund into the city's general fund. The electric transfer consisted of about 9% of those sales, those retail sales. What you saw from 01 through 11-12, however, was a gradual increase over that period of time from 9% to 12.3% in the current fiscal year. That totals $21.11 million to the general fund. Now, there are a few things that are going on with respect to GWP during that period of time. Context is critically important. First and foremost, the economy ebbed and flowed, or flowed and ebbed, such as it were, during that period of time. And it did have an impact on the city's general funds, and as GWP is part of the overall organization, council over the years saw fit to increase that transfer to offset costs to the city's services. Other costs were applied to GWP, costs for streetlights and other types of services for the electricity for those streetlights. As you saw the increase go from 9 to 9.7, back down to 9, 10.2%, 12.5%, 10.9, 10.3, 10.2, 11.5%, 12.8 in 11-12, and as I say, 12.3 in fiscal year 11-12. I'm sorry, 10-11, then 11-12. You had the interplay of the economy. You had the especially the last year and a half, the reallocation of the costs accruing to the utility in such a way that the water utilities transfer was eliminated. The increase was that elimination was partially offset by an increase in the electric utility. You also saw folks adhere to the requests of GWP, the Commission and the Council, to conserve and use less electricity, thus driving down the retail sales. You saw, again, the interplay of the economy to drive down the amount of sales. And so when we look at what that percentage is, that percentage is going to, you saw it increase and decrease. You could say it's because of the economy, which would be true. You could say because the transfer itself went up, which is true. You can ascribe any number of factors to it, but at the end of the day, I think we can look at what that number is, that $21,107,000, and say that that is, at the end of the day, what the butcher's bill is. So that's what the utility is contributing to the general fund. And from there, we can make any number of statements about whether we want to continue that. I know, certainly, that the degree of the transfer has an impact on the viability of the utility. And I know you all are very sensitive to that as well, as commissioners for the utility. Our goal is to be competitive for our residents and also our businesses. As we go out and try to recruit new businesses, we want to make sure that the cost of doing business in Glendale is as low as possible. Having an inordinately high transfer rate is at odds with that philosophy. And so we have a built-in, innate desire to try to reduce that. But the economy being what it is, and the fact that this increase has transpired, this degree of increase has transpired over a period of years, I think it's unwise, perhaps even irresponsible, to try to accomplish that all at once. And I would hope and expect that you would agree with that. Because at the end of the day, what the transfer is going towards in the general fund are all those general services that are provided, from public safety to quality of life and everything in between, your parks, your libraries, your police, your fire. I don't know that if you were to go to any Glendale business, any Glendale resident, any of our customers, and say, here are the trade-offs of reducing that transfer immediately to bring down your electricity rates, but here's what the residual impact is going to be, that they would say, yes, I'm happy with that trade-off. That is much more of a decision, a subjective decision and discussion that we can have, but there's also this overlay of what is allowable, what the charter does dictate, what the state laws dictate, and ultimately what is in the best long-term interest of GWP. That all comes together in a very broad, long-term philosophical discussion for GWP. What I can tell you at this point is that we are focused on reducing the transfer over time with a good faith first step in this current or this coming fiscal year The journey begins with the first step, and so we are reducing that transfer to the general fund by $250,000. Our goal will be in the 13-14 year to reduce it considerably more, hopefully as high as $750,000. And as years progress, the idea being that we want to be down to a much more industry standard transfer that will probably be in the neighborhood of that 7 to 8% of retail sales. That is no easy task. Even as you see rates going up, and I do expect that electric rates will go up, rates for darn near everything go up. And so we will have a glide down pattern for you and for the City Council to take a look at what happens with the rates as we bring down the dollar amount from $21 million to probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $14 or $15 million, but the idea being that it relates back to a industry standard percentage transfer. As we had talked with Fitch Rating last week, I can tell you that our bond rating is not nearly as impacted as you might think by the amount of the transfer based on what other regions of the country are becoming accustomed to. But as I said previously, the goal for us is to find what's the right balance for Glendale. You want that transfer to be reduced. The council wants that transfer to be reduced. I want that transfer to be reduced. Certainly our customers do. But I think it's incumbent on us to find the best way to make that happen. I can tell you that is the focus of the discussion with City Council as this discussion about transfer, or rather rates comes upon them during the summer in the next couple of months, and even in the bonding question that will come up shortly after the discussion on rates. What I can leave you with is this. The city's fire department budget is $59 million. Our police department budget is $70.6 million for the coming year. Library is $8.6 million for the coming year. I don't believe that at this point we are prepared to drop that transfer precipitously in order to bring it into alignment for GWP's purposes if it comes at the expense of the other departments. Even if it means that we can't increase rates, even if it means that we have to find other ways to shore up the finances of GWP, because we view this as one larger system providing services for all of Glendale, we have to find the answer that works best. Not necessarily right, not necessarily wrong, but best for the provision of services over the long term. With that, I'll stop, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address those, noting that there are things that I probably can't or won't get into with respect to upcoming rates and charter provisions until we get the final word in from the City Attorney's Office.
I'd like to start off with just a couple of questions. There currently on all utility bills, not just electric and water, but telephone, cell phones, there's the UUT tax, which was a measure that was passed a few election cycles ago.
Yes.
Can you define for the public where those funds go versus where GWP general fund transfer funds go?
The UUT flows into the general fund as well at this point in time. The primary funding sources for the city's general fund are property taxes to the tune of about $40 million, sales taxes to the tune of about $28 million when you add up all the different pieces of it, UUT of about $27.8 million. I'm sorry, that's a little bit higher. No, it's about 27 it's actually gone down. My apologies. Went down in 11, 12, and then came back up and leveled off in this current year. But even that is reflecting the volatility of the market. When folks are buying less in their utilities, well, that has to reflect on this tax that is a percentage above that. But all of those funds lead into a $165 million general fund.
So to follow up with that, I think one of the issues that I've raised in a variety of commission meetings is that You have the UUT as a line item on your bill, so you see it very clearly. It's transparent. There's a tax being charged there. Whereas with the general fund transfer, it's behind the scenes, meaning it's in the books of GWP, but it's not something your customer sees on their bill, even though it's, they are paying it because it's built into the rate structure and built into the GWP budget. So one of the topics that I've brought up is, looking at bringing GWP's transfer rate in line with more of the standards across the country in terms of municipal utilities. But B was a transparency issue, which is for people to know that they are paying that through their utility bill so that it's not a hidden taxation system. It's not to say that most cities use the utilities to raise some revenue, some level of revenues to support the overall operations of the city, but I think it's really important to consider not only the realignment of the amounts, but also transparency in terms of that is built into the to the model, as well as some level of education of here's where your tax dollars go type of thing, so that people can understand, what are the things that both the UUT as well as the general fund transfer from the GWP goes to support, so that people have an appreciation for what are they getting for their dollar, as taxpayers, because in essence it is a tax that they're paying, just like the tax that they pay when they go and buy anything from the store in terms of sales tax revenue or the property tax that they pay. I think that level of education is an important thing. I do have so that was more of a comment. The question I do have is, you mentioned that, ultimately you'll come back with a more definitive plan on this. Do you have some sort of timing in mind as to when we might see more details?
I think what you'll end up seeing after we stabilize the finances of GWP, presumably by mid-fiscal year of 12-13, the glide path, if you will, of what the transfer we hope and expect the transfer to be. Now that is that is like our 5-year financial projection. It's a rolling 5-year projection. So if the economy sinks further, what we hope is a 10-year stabilization. It took us 10 years to get to where we are, 10 years to get out of that. If that does not materialize, then that 10-year plan becomes effectively, as it rolls, an 11-year or a 12-year. As I say, we're looking for the best balance of what that will be. So mid-year budget of 12-13, which we expect to be the February of 13 is when mid-year budget comes back to City Council. If you've been watching the budget hearings that we've been having, with all of the cuts, the layoffs, and the reductions, understanding what ultimately all that means when it shakes out is going to take several months to materialize. So we will be back in front of you with an update certainly in November for the first quarter, but I think what you will see in terms of what you're looking for, Chair Armenian, is that report comes back in that form February 13.
Okay. I do appreciate you taking the time. I mean, we put this on the agenda specifically to start the discussion. It's not the beginning or end of it's the beginning, but it's not the end of the discussion. We wanted to start addressing the topics so that as things become more clear, we can have more in-depth discussions. With that, are there other commissioners? Mr. Yap?
Yes. Well, thank you, Mr. Ochoa, for that presentation. What I'm also concerned about is it's good that we're trying to reduce the transfer fund, but I'm also concerned, as part of my comment from last month's meeting, is that what we'll call the non-cash transfer. So I didn't hear from your comment how we're going to address that issue, because I understand that GWP is providing a service to the city in general, but the city is not paying for some services. So that, in my opinion, is considered a transfer of some sort, but it's a non-cash transfer. You can't use that cash in the general fund to go for other services. So how would you address that non-cash transfer? If you can lay it out, because my request is just to lay it out as a line item so that council can see it clearly, that potentially it could be down to 8 or 9%, but if you add the non-cash transfer, it could be bringing back up. So that is one way to reduce the transfer.
You're talking about street lights and things like that.
Street lights and other services that
Sure.
GWP is not being paid for.
No, I think what you will see, what we have to do, in all honesty, in all candor, what we have to do with respect to the upcoming rate increase is pull back the curtain on all of those types of expenses for GWP. But I think you as commissioners, certainly the city council, we as staff, and even the public has to ask itself as to what it is that it wants to pay for. Because if ultimately we say that, we, instead of having GWP pay for electricity for those streetlights, we need to have a lighting landscape assessment district citywide to have all parcel owners pay for that service, because obviously that service is being provided. All Glendalians are benefiting by that service. They all like having those lights on. So let's put it out to that vote. Now, play it out that folks don't want to support that. Well, what do? Do we stop lighting the lights, or do we do something else? At this point, we have so hogtied the ability of any level of government in this state to raise revenue for the things that people want. There are no good or easy answers left. So I would say yes, we do need to show all of that information, and we will in the coming rate discussion. But we have to be prepared for the answers that we uncover and be comfortable with the solutions that we will be faced with digesting, because we may not want ultimately what the ultimate disposition of those solutions might require.
And that's great to hear, because my whole point is transparency. As long as we lay it out there, and it's for City Council to decide ultimately what to do with that. If they decide that that is part of that overall transfer that they're willing to accept in the good of the city, then I'm okay with that too. But like Mr. Minion was saying, that it's not anywhere in the bill or anywhere the transfer is listed, and the non-cash item transfer is not anywhere laid out. And the public wouldn't have known if maybe the other public comment speakers didn't raise that issue. And so potentially I'd like to see that in the future of any presentation to the commission or council, that non-cash transfer be itemized so that everyone can see it. And ultimately, I would be okay with whatever city council decides. And if it is that they decide that the additional percentage is worthwhile for the benefit of the citizens, then I'm okay with that. But that brings me to the second point of, you mentioned that there will be other services like fire, police, and library services that could be impacted by if we minimize the transfer at this point. So who decides that? I know City Council does, but how do you measure that the value of staff or employees of GDP be compared to fire, police, or librarians, where potentially layoffs could happen in any of those departments if there's a lack of funding? So by transferring the fund from GWP, you're bulking up the other departments or minimizing their impact, but we're impacting GWP staff and employees. So who makes that decision, a choice?
It's a value decision made by City Council based on the recommendations of staff. If we were to say that we've taken great pains in this budget process to hold harmless sworn safety personnel, the number of sworn officers, and while we are looking to reduce the number of paramedics, that is a structured reduction as part of the ALS-BLS program. But let's say that we chose not to do that. Let's say that we wanted to increase the impact of the reduction of the transfer by reducing police services. Well, right now, GWP doesn't exist in a vacuum. Not one of our departments does. With the impact being felt right now with the realignment under AB 109, where you don't have the state of California able to make good on its commitment to operate a functional penal system and pushing nonviolent offenders down into the county system, where they are now subject to alternative monitoring as opposed to incarceration or actual parole, and you see it manifest out on the street with respect to an increase in thefts, burglaries, and other quote-unquote nonviolent crimes, then folks have to answer for themselves, what is important as we set priorities. As a municipal government, I would submit to you that our top operational priority is going to be public safety. It's that way. I would submit to you, I bet you dollars to donuts, if you go up and down this state and across this nation, folks want to feel first and foremost that they are safe. Now, Glendale is one of the top 10 safest communities in the entire country for communities between 100,000 and 500,000 population. If we dropped into 20 or 25th, which is still good, but it's not where we are, what is the value and the impact on that to all of our residents? That's the question that gets asked, and it isn't something that is necessarily empirical. It's something that the policymakers in the form of the city council have to evaluate based on what they hear from the community. That's why I say, whatever we do here at GWP is part of the city of Glendale at the end of the day. It's a utility, but it's a utility that exists for the benefit of this community. Part of our problem, I think, over time is that we've increased that transfer because we've needed to, and maybe have been able to forestall some of these other discussions that we probably should have had, that we've been having over the last several years, that we're having today, and will continue to have going forward. But the short answer to your question is the city council gets to make that decision, and the council makes that decision by looking at what's going on in the community.
Well, that's helpful to explain to the public, because we don't want to have this discussion in a vacuum that the transfer is a transfer. We have to, like you mentioned, assess the overall department in terms of what is the best course for the whole city. But we do want to look at and step back and look at GWP as also a business unit where there is increase in revenue and cost. So potentially that we look at how profitable or effective a department or a business unit is. So we want to look in GWP in terms of the whole all citywide services, but we have to look at it as a operating unit. So if we do see that it's not profitable, and like some of the previous discussion was that why have a city utility if it's not profitable? Is it just a cash cow and raising everyone's rates, or is it something that we can actually be profitable at and provide the additional revenue that the city needs? So we have to look at both ways. I agree with you that we need to make those hard choices, and the city council has to ultimately make those decisions and give and take, but we do have to make sure that the utility is operating at its best and make sure that the employees and staff are working at the highest level and the morale is great and that they are in it for the long haul. So thank you for those comments, and it's good that the public is aware that there are sacrifices being made, and so it's not just GWP.
Certainly.
Other commissioners?
I just have one question, and it's about your reference to the industry standards. Since I'm not an industry professional, and like some of my fellow commissioners, I just wanted a better understanding of industry standard. Is your reference to industry standard involving 8 to 10% of sales being transferred? Is that as to municipal utilities where cities own their own utilities like we do?
That's my understanding, ma'am.
And is that a national or a regional industry standard?
It's an American Public Power Association
Okay.
survey of municipal utilities.
So that would be nationwide?
Yes.
Okay. My only other comment, I really appreciated what Commissioner Yao said, and I agree with everything he said. I would caution against, I know you didn't mean it this way, but sometimes overemphasizing scenarios like crime going up if we cut police budgets and losing our place in the national rankings of being a safe city, et cetera. I think sometimes that can be carried too far in that we on the Commission, I think I probably speak for all of us, really regard provision of safe drinking water and a safe power supply as a fundamental health and safety issue as well, and that it has health and safety impacts on the community. And when a large storm event happens or any kind of disaster, where we have one on later on our agenda concerning an airplane, I think that that you as a manager, I would encourage you to fold in our employees' activities in talking about overall quality of life, in that, we're not a Art in the Parks program, not to disparage that, but in tough fiscal times, I think our community expects access to safe drinking water and to quick turnaround and restoration of our power, especially after natural disasters. So I just put that into the mix.
Ma'am, I totally agree, and I will tell you, we don't know each other at all at this point. Soon we will. I will tell you that I am not one for hyperbole. I am explaining at this point that if we were looking at the cuts that the city of Glendale is making 5 years ago, in 2007, I would be remiss to make some of the comments that I've made now, because there's still room and opportunity to cut. at the tail end of the recession, at the tail end of the dissolution of redevelopment. I couldn't overstate it in terms of what it means for the positions that we're trying to continue funding in the police department, on top of the ones that have already been eliminated.
I understand. You don't need to belabor the point. My point is made.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the point is that it's an essential service, just like police and fire. If you don't have power, you will see your crime rate go up when all the lights go out. So I think it's important to view it as an essential service, and it's part of that whole mixture. Mr. Jemian, do you have anything before we do have public comments? I'd like to move to that. Mr. Herbert Milano. Three minutes, please.
Commission President Armenian, members of the Glendale Water and Power Commission and staff, my name is Herbert Milano. I am going to serve as a conduit to the efforts of Mr. Harry Zavos in regard to the charter requirements that the City of Glendale has had stated. And what I presented to you and what I have here present with regard to this PowerPoint is that various different articles of the Charter are clearly established if we were to take the time to look at what the Charter provides. It establishes for a Waterworks Revenue Fund, Electric Works Revenue Fund, and it requires also, it allows for the disbursements of water revenue from each one of the funds and from the Electric Fund, respectively. But the Charter also has provisions for a sinking fund. And that sinking fund is for the payment of principal and interest on the bonds. That is one of the principal disbursements that the city must take care of before it does anything else. It also has a depreciation fund. And so from the proceeds of these operations, the city must address the depreciation funds. The information is up to the city manager to determine what funds are appropriate, but I think it's up to this commission to determine the right amounts of depreciation that it will take to maintain the normal operations of the utility in a proper state. We go to the next slide, please. Then the city, the Glendale Water and Power Surplus Fund is created. And this surplus fund is the remainder of what is left after taking care of those obligations. It's very clear. It is, if any excess is left, the amount is put into the surplus fund, and it is limited by the amount of 25% of the overall revenues. The 25% is a limit based upon the availability of the city to be able to determine if there are sufficient funds available within that fund. In addition to these documents, there are some other papers that I added to it that explains very clearly what it is. I'm just a conduit to Mr. Harry Savos' work. I looked at it myself, and it makes a lot of sense. The interpretation given to us by the city attorney is incorrect, in my opinion, is deficient, and is misleading. Then there's a general reserve fund that is created. The general reserve fund is a revolving fund that lends the money to the general fund and must be returned back to the reserve fund. And these are the intricacies that are provided for you in the charter amendment, that upon review by you carefully, you will probably agree that what we have done during the past many years has been an improper adherence to the Glendale Charter.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. Next, Mr. Zavos.
5 minutes, all communications. Before I begin, I'm going to pass up a document that I'll be referring to, which is a flow chart of how various charter funds operate, along with the text of
Please go ahead and give it to him so that Mr. Agabayans can distribute it.
the charter with interspersed comments of mine. My name is Harry Zawos. I'll wait till you get it because I will refer to it and read from it. Plan for 5 minutes, so I'll have to try to cut this short. I want to have you see the case for the transfers of electrical fees going to the general fund violates the Constitution. And I begin with the first page following the flow chart, which is Section 20, which creates the revenue funds for water and electric, where all the receipts are deposited. And if you look at the last paragraph, it indicates what is transferred to the general surplus fund. And let me read that. The credit balance, if any, or any part thereof, in each said funds, electric or water, at the end of any fiscal year, the amount of which is in excess of the amount of all outstanding demands and liabilities unpaid for said fund on account of budget appropriations, therefrom shall be transferred to the Glendale Water and Power Surplus Fund. Now, any appropriation beginning at the fiscal year of a specific amount violates that provision of the charter in two ways. One, the charter says that's to be determined at the end of the year, not at the beginning of the year. And more importantly, it indicates that the amount that goes is the excess after all budget appropriations have been accounted for. You can hardly have a budgeted appropriation of money of electrical fees to go to the general fund and at the same time for it to be the excess of budgeted appropriations. It's just a non sequitur. Now, if you go to page, and again I'm having to rush through this, if you go to page 4, first paragraph, that creates the GWP surplus fund. And let me read the first paragraph, which reiterates what we've just looked at. It says, a fund to be known as the Glendale Water and Power Surplus Fund is hereby created, to which fund shall be credited from the receipts of the Department of Glendale Water and Power and the Waterworks Revenue Fund and the Electrical Works Revenue Fund, any amounts in excess of the requirements of the several funds as herebefore set forth. What are those funds? They're the revenue funds in terms of obligations yet not paid. They are the sinking funds to take care of the bonds, and they're the depreciation funds to take care of critically and needed capital improvements. And only after you've taken care of that, any excess, not a specific budgeted amount, goes to the surplus fund. And if you'll go down to the last paragraph before you have my comments, you'll see in the box that money goes to the general reserve fund, not to the general fund. If you go to the next page, that gives you the general reserve fund. I haven't had time to talk about it, but Mr. Milano indicated it's a revolving line of credit. But if you then go to page 6, which is a general budget fund that takes care of general appropriations, I'm going to leave some words out, but you can follow it in the document, beginning with the underlined portions. It says, a fund to be known as a general budget fund is hereby created. All receipts from general tax levies, license fees, permits, and interest on bank accounts and all other receipts except those from the Department of Glendale and Water shall be credited to such fund. It precludes GWP funds going to that fund. I would hope that you would take time, again, as I said, I went much faster. I could slow down and take questions, that you would look very carefully at that flow chart. It has sections of the charter upon which every item is based, and it has those charter provisions appended so you can read them. It has significant portions underlined, and any attempt or any justification for taking monies from GWP Electrical Works and taking it to the general fund to support general services must account for these provisions, which on their face contradict such a procedure. One, because it says any funds transferred out of those water and electric revenue funds, other than what goes for the purposes of Glendale Water and Power, have to be surplus after all budget appropriations are taken care of. So you can't take the money that's being transferred and make it a budget appropriation, since the charter says all that goes is what is left over after budgeted appropriations. And then it says those budgeted appropriations go to the reserve fund, not to the general fund, which is a revolving fund of credit. And then the general budget fund indicates that receipts of GWP are not credited to it.
Mr. Zawis, before you go back, I do have a question. First of all,
Happy to take them.
I do appreciate the time you've taken to articulate your views, regardless of whether or not people agree or disagree with those views. I do appreciate a citizen taking that time to prepare and research to support your point of views and participating in the process. So I first just wanted to express some appreciation for that. But I do have a specific question. Can you did rush through it rather quickly.
Yes.
For the benefit of the public, could you summarize in one sentence what your bottom line conclusion is?
The best I can do is to say that, and it's not what I think, it's the clear language of the charter. I've read from the charter that language specifically indicates that GWP fees that get used for something other than GW purposes or needs can only be the excess over budgeted after all budgeted appropriations have been taken care of. And then those fees go to a fund which is a revolving fund of credit, not to the general fund to support services. And if I may say, I realize we have a budget shortfall. The city is not without means to make up that shortfall. The law allows the city to raise general revenues to support general services, but they've got to go to a vote of the people. So to transfer electrical fees in violation of the charter in order to take care of that shortfall is a way of circumventing going to the people and asking the people for those levies. And that is a very severe distrust of democratic government, and it is the people that should decide the priorities of how money is spent.
But are you asserting that, before you even get to that part of your conclusion,
Yes.
Are you asserting that the other obligations of GWP are not being met to begin with before you even get to the surplus?
Well, all I know is this, that there was a presentation indicating there's some $24 million of critical improvements for the electrical works that are having to be deferred because there's no money. And at the same time, $21 million is being transferred to the general fund in conflict, in violation of the express language of the charter, which you have in front of you and you can read for yourself, and which I've read portions for in this presentation.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, Mr. Zavos? Okay. We do have Mr. Kazazian, 5. You have a card for 5B as well.
Okay, my name is Aram Kazazian. I'm over here. I'll make it short so I know you're short of time. The water transfers are still going on for the public to know. We have not stopped the water transfer. The only thing we're doing, we're not transferring from the front door of the house, but we're transferring from the back door of the house. That's what's going on.
Mr. Kazazian, the topic is not related
Well, I'm
to
talking
water
about transfers. I'm talking about transfer. This is a transfer item, 5B.
Okay, I just want to caution you to keep your comments to
Okay.
that agendized item.
Okay, I'm talking about the transfer. The transfer, it's happening is transferring to water revenue is transferring to electrical funds, and from the electrical is being transferred. By doing that, we are generating more expense on the water to be transferred as reading the billing system. The billing system is says 50-50. So we're transferring $2.1 million more funds from the water into the electrical system. From the electricals being transferred to the general fund, which is illegal. I've read the charter. Unfortunately, I did not read the charter all these years, but for 10 years, everybody has come over here, asked that there is a problem with this transfer, and Starbird has always indicated that, we must transfer the money into the general fund. which is incorrect until everybody read the charter. The charter is very clear. Charter says you cannot transfer. It has to go to the reserve fund, which you just heard and learned about it, and then from there it's transferred up. It only stays there. So we need to do the general repairs and maintenance of the infrastructure before we can allow any more transfers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions on this agenda topic of Mr. Ochoa or Mr. Zern?
I have a question for the attorney. Currently, how is the city council dealing with the Section 15 General Reserve Fund issue? Or maybe you don't agree it is an issue, but this issue that's been raised with us concerning the requirement in the charter that the council, if it does transfer, the transfers are to go to the General Reserve Fund rather than the General Fund. And I wondered how that's working at present.
Commissioner Dentler, presently our office is evaluating that, so
Okay.
I don't have a response for you today, but I expect that we will in the near future.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Ochoa or Mr. Zern, on this topic? Not. Thank you very much, Mr. Ochoa, for that informative presentation, and I'll reiterate that this isn't the end of our conversation on this topic, but we wanted to start the discussion because it's a pretty complicated topic to address. So I appreciate both your presentations, and I also appreciate the presentations made by those in the public who are concerned about the issue. Okay, let's move back. I am going to jump around because we have 50 minutes left in our session, and so we may end up bumping some items depending on where we get. So I'm going to, if you'll allow me to prioritize here, I would like to get to move next to 4A.
4A, Quarterly Risk Management Update, Mike Bell.
And I'd like just to interject that it's characterized as an announcement in the agenda, but as you can see from the text beneath, it's actually an action item and an update.
Thank you, George. Good afternoon, President Armenian, members of the GWP Commission. Mike Bell representing GWP Finance. I have here a presentation that was delayed from last month's meeting on the quarterly update of the risk management plan. Today we have, as Godinez mentioned, one action item and two items to update you with. The first action item would be to obtain the Commission discussion on the proposed policy addendum number 1, and I'll run through that with you in just a moment. And then secondly, updates on the status of the risk management program assessment and internal audit schedule for the audit of the market and trading group. So the recommended change to the policy is addendum number 1, and in summary, this does one simple thing for the traders. It would allow them to purchase short-term energy from counterparties that otherwise they would not be able to trade with. And the reason for that is the credit quality of that counterparty. The city would not want to be in a position of trading with these parties if it were to present a potential for a loss. But in this case, the opportunity is there to purchase energy, for example, from a party, so the city is receiving that good right up front and then paying that entity for the power that is purchased. So in no way is the city at risk because the power is being delivered to the city, and the city is the one that then has the financial responsibility to make the payment for the energy received. This change to policy was taken through the Energy Risk Management Committee at its April 12th meeting and was passed by the committee. is brought to the commission for your discussion and recommendation, and then, assuming it's approved here, would go to City Council for their approval. That said, let me just read to you what this addendum specifically says, and that is, for buying from restricted counterparties, GWP will only have the authority to purchase, no sales, short-term energy not to exceed a next day scheduled horizon, provided that energy purchased for that day does not exceed $200,000 total or 50 megawatts per hour, and as long as that counterparty for a short-term transaction is approved by the Director of Finance or his designee. So with that said, I'd be happy to take any questions you may have, and after your deliberation, I believe we would need a motion if you're so inclined.
I do have a couple questions to start with. So if I'm understanding it correctly, just to put it in more plain English for people, what you're saying is that if a third party, is contracted by one of the entities from whom we are buying power, we are trying to minimize our risk because we do not have a view into the viability of that third party provider, and so we want to minimize our risk, our financial exposure to that sort of risk. Is that a correct?
That's right, and that's why this specifically says no sales. So the city would not sell energy to this third party because they, for whatever reason, don't have the credit quality that the city would like. But this would enable the city to purchase energy, which it receives immediately, up to 50 megawatts. And at that point, then the city, under the terms of whatever the transaction is, at some point, usually 10 days to 30 days, would pay for that power. So the risk is...
It's not eliminated, it's minimized.
Right, and that's why it specifically says no sales, so that the city's not transacting with a party that doesn't have the credit quality that it would desire.
And then my second question is, what about in circumstances where the need may be more than 50 megawatts at that moment? What happens?
They would have to transact with parties that meet those credit counterparty obligations.
Okay, so
and that's the normal case. Honestly, I think that the traders want this because every once in a while they see a good buy out there and a relatively small amount, and they can save a little bit of money, and that's why they're asking for it. But typically, I wouldn't imagine that this would be exercised very often. For one thing, the traders will have to go to the finance director or the designee to get the authority to do it, and they usually act pretty quick. So I imagine they wouldn't ask for it if they weren't going to use it, but I don't imagine that they will exercise this.
In this case, the director of finance we're referring to is GWP's director of finance?
It's the city finance director, okay. Bob Elliott, or his designee. And so he could designate somebody within GWP.
Does that flow through GWP's finance people
yes,
know what's going on?
All the energy transactions go through the GWP finance group.
Okay, and then in this case, that's you for now, right?
Yes, I'm going to introduce a little later in the presentation. We have made a hire for the finance position. I'll introduce him as we get to the end of this presentation.
Okay. Any other questions?
So, quick one. You might have answered briefly, like why this and why now. Potentially, is there a gap that we're trying to fill? I mean, how big an issue is this?
Well, what I hear from the traders is there are one or two parties that they see offer power at a discount to what they're presently paying, and that's why they're asking for this. And it's not large transaction, under 50 megawatts, under 200,000, but they do see some opportunities where they could purchase power at a cheaper cost for the city, and they'd like to have the ability to do that.
What is our maximum exposure? It says 200,000. Is that what we potentially could lose if everything goes bad on us?
No, the city actually can't lose as long as the power is delivered. If the power is not delivered, the city won't pay. So this just enables them to make a purchase of energy, which would be received that day or the next day, and then the purchase and use of that energy then creates the financial obligation on the part of the city to pay for that. So there really is no risk here.
So why wasn't this included in initial part of the?
It wasn't thought of at the time that the policy was developed, and that's why they've asked now for it to be included in the policy.
So it sounds like there's control in place as well as minimizing our risk. So I mean, it sounds like something we essentially. I mean, I would be supportive of this now that you answered some questions that I had concerns with.
And that was the conclusion of the Risk Management Committee, which unanimously approved this language. They did add, the committee did add in the 50 megawatts, the $200,000, and the approval of the Director of Finance to this language. So that's what made it acceptable to that Risk Management Committee.
Other comments?
I have some questions. Are our traders GWP employees?
Yes, they are.
Is this an industry standard, this provision for dealing with restricted counterparties? Whether municipal utilities do this?
Yeah, all municipals that I've seen do have policies such as this. They may differ in terms of what they allow or do not allow traders to do.
Sure.
So
But this doesn't
everyone's a
make us
little different, but
But we're not a radical outlier
No.
if we adopt this.
No.
The finance director being able to designate someone with this authority, will this motion, if we pass it today, and I expect to support it, will this then go to City Council, or will this become a policy of GWP?
So you would be recommending to
It's our
City Council to
recommendation.
approve.
Okay, so there's
it
another
would
level
need to be
of-
approved by,
Thank
this
you.
would need to be approved by
All
the
right.
council.
So I don't know, if I were on council, I might wonder about the designation. So the director of finance could designate somebody within GWP, so that could say be Mr. Zern, but could it be one of the traders? It's no limitation right now.
I do not think so, just for separation of responsibilities. It would
I'll leave that up to
need to
council,
be
but-
somebody likely in the finance group that
But there's
is
no-
not involved in trading.
But there's no
Commissioner
language
Gentler,
about that.
Well, under the current energy risk management policy, there's a very strict separation of functions.
Okay.
You could not have
Yeah.
a trader.
Okay,
That's
I
why-
assumed, but thank you. And then impact on bond rating for the utility dealing with restricted counterparties, is there any?
No. And we just met, as the city manager identified, we just met with Fitch 2 weeks ago. And that one of the things they asked for was our policy, and they've looked at it, reviewed it, and among many other things they're evaluating, they were satisfied with that.
And then restricted counterparty sales, to a layperson like me, that kind of signals to me that those might be more expensive. You're saying these are good deals that the traders want to make.
Right.
Could they also be slightly more expensive, though? If we want power fast, we're going to pay a little bit of a premium because we're dealing with restricted
Well,
counterparties.
typically, what they will do is check prices for a various number of potential sellers, and they have a list in front of them of counterparties that are pre-approved and the credit. And the credit limits. In fact, they are limited in terms of transactions. Most of them in the $5 to $10 million range, because you would not want to transact all your business with one party. If something went wrong, you'd have risk there. So they have a pre-approved list that they can enter transactions with. They will look at that list and then start making phone calls and get bids, basically, and if they see a price that they like, then they'll enter into that transaction. This just allows them to transact with somebody that's not on that list.
I understand. But when you say that doesn't, it doesn't call for, you said no large transactions. I read this as, well, if you had one every day, that would add up to a lot of transactions. That's the same as one large.
And that's one of the reasons why it's good to have somebody in the finance area looking at it and saying, hey, you're doing too many, or I'm not going to approve those.
Okay.
And that puts somebody outside of the trading group as kind of a check on what's...
That's why I asked, could a designee be the trader? So thank you. Well, with that, those were excellent answers to my questions. I'm sorry to ask so many, and I would support the motion.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to proceed with the motion now or give the rest of your update in case somebody wants to speak.
Well, we actually have a public comment.
Okay.
I'd suggest
then
go through the
agenda
I
item.
may as well finish the presentation then. Progress on the program assessment. Let me remind you that we are in the process of reviewing the trading area, and that the progress that we've made thus far is we being myself, Risk Management International, who's our middle office consultant and risk manager, as well as the city internal audit group, prepared a list of questions for all of the front, middle, back office employees, as well as the city attorney who participates in this process. And we reviewed the responses to those questions and met with each of those individuals. And where we are right now is RMI is drafting a final report, and that should be available, I expect, within about a week. We will look at that as a group, get back with the people that we interviewed, go over findings and recommendations from that report, and then I expect that we'd be able to give the Commission an update as to what we found in the process of that assessment at your next quarterly meeting. So that's where we are with that. We're close to being finished with that work. We also had a Risk Management Committee meeting in April on the 12th, at which the addendum we just discussed was approved. And there also was approval of a landfill gas hedge strategy. In this case, under the policies, risk management policies of the city, the Risk Management Committee has the authorization to make this strategy without having to go through the Commission or the Council. It's something that was given to this group by the Council in the policy. So just the background on what was done there. In 2009, the city basically fixed the price of gas used from Shoal landfill and removed any upside exposure to the price of that gas going up. The trading group, having witnessed gas prices declining precipitously the last few years, has asked for a strategy that would allow them to cover the downside should prices continue to decrease in the gas market. And the committee, after discussion, decided that they would allow that strategy up to 30% of the volume of gas that is consumed. So this strategy was put in place based on the Risk Management Committee's assessment. The continuing action items, addendum number 1 with your consideration, we will complete the risk assessment and have a report ready for you by the next meeting. Also, I would like to point out that with Mr. Zern starting and Eric Campbell There he is. Eric is the new finance administrator for GWP Finance. He started a week ago. Fantastic background. Eric has 20 years of service at Los Angeles Department of Water and Power in their finance group in a number of different roles. He also spent approximately 4 years up at Seattle City Light as their energy risk manager. So what I see, the city is getting a very well experienced person here in the risk management field, and I expect that he will bring very good insight and thoughts and recommendations to the position. And so that's why we put this bullet item here, internal review, because I think Mr. Campbell and Mr. Zern definitely will want to take the opportunity to look at the practices and evaluate them themselves. And I think that will be a healthy review, and certainly Mr. Campbell has excellent qualifications to do so. Also spoke with the city auditor this morning, and she indicated that they are now ready to start the city's internal audit of the marketing and trading group in the month of July. So that will start up here pretty quickly, and I think based on discussions with them, that will be a pretty intensive audit, probably go well beyond this assessment that we're in the process of wrapping up. And one thing that we've done is we've made sure that we have our regularly scheduled energy risk management committee meetings. For a while there, they weren't happening on a regular basis, but since I've been engaged here, we're making sure that we're doing those regularly. So that's the update on the quarterly risk.
Yes.
Happy to answer any questions.
Yes, how often is the city audit, does it take place?
Well, the last one that was done was 2006, and actually we've had some discussions that probably not more than a year or two should go by without them taking a look in that area, because there's a lot of dollars, and it's probably a good practice not to let it go that long.
Is there a mandate or a...
just internal discussions with city management and with internal audit. So I think the intent is to not let so much time go by between audits.
Something that I'd like to discuss in the future, maybe put some mechanism in place so that we can have a frequent audit. Not as frequent as every year, but it could be 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, on a regular basis. Any other questions? We do have 2 public comments, but before we go to them, I'd like to ask these individuals whether or not their comments pertain to the overall risk management update or whether they pertain specifically to the motion that's being proposed, because if it's not the motion specifically, I would like to get through the motion first, and then we will have public comment. So the 2 individuals are Mr. Kazazian and Mr. Milano. Okay. Mr. Milano? Okay. Mr. Kazazian.
Motion.
The motion.
Okay, right there. My name is Aram Kazajian. As you know, I had many concerns about the finances of Glendale Water and Power when I saw a lot of problems coming up a few years back. In fact, I was here 3 years ago. I questioned a lot of the issues. I'm not going to go into that now, but there's one last item I'd like to for your commission to take out the word designee out of there, because unless you do have a specific person's name, if you have Steve Zern on it, that will be great. I know he's very busy. He won't be able to do designee. If not, put a specific person's name. Do not leave it as open. The director of financing is fine, but he should not designate it to an unknown. He should have some record on that. As you know, also, I was here last year and a few months ago. Again, I've been asking for an audit because I do have some concerns about it. It has not been done. The marketing trade, that's where lot of money has been lost, and you know it, and public has lost, has distrust of the Glendale Water and Power right now. It's getting larger and larger. Next couple of months going to even get worse when more things come out. Because this came up 3 years ago, and I warned City Council. I didn't come over here, unfortunately. I did warn City Council of some of the issues. I brought some information, very important information, by two different municipalities, gave to City Council, and informing them very clearly that the former Imperial Irrigation District had lost $55 million on trades, and another one was Massachusetts Municipal Water Electric Company that Steiger went. Steiger went there into 2006, and he left there in 2008 because problems. I have all the records on that. I have files. You can, if you want, I can bring you about a couple of thousand pages. And this goes beyond that problem. That's why now the Glendale Water and Power finances is such a big mess. That's why the Glendale Water and Power is distrusted by the public at this time. So please take that wording out of there. I would appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Next speaker, Mr. Milano.
Members of the GWP Commission and staff, my name is Herbert Milano. I have a couple of questions that perhaps the Commission can answer, or a request for the staff to answer for you. What are the amounts of funds and what are the total funds that are generally maintained by GWP for the purposes of trading? Question one. Question two, what was the largest loss that the city had in any single month in the past year? And this will be a question with regard to the new employee, Mr. Eric Campbell, in his experience with the LA Department of Water and Power. Compared to other utilities, how do we evaluate the performance of the LA DWP with regard to their trading practices? Thanks.
Are there any of those questions that can be answered easily without researching either Mr. Zern or...
Mr. President, it's not looking that way. I see shaking of heads by Mr. Linz and Mr. Bell, and so if you'd like, we can get back to you with responses to those particular questions.
I think they're valid questions, so let's look at them. I don't think it should stop us from moving forward, but it's important questions to ask, maybe in that they can be brought up. I know we look at risk management on a regular basis, so maybe we can incorporate those, unless you can find the answers and maybe present them as part of the old business for the next agenda.
Either way, that would be fine. Absolutely.
Let's shoot for the old business agenda item for the next meeting for those questions.
We will do that.
Any commissioners have any comments there, specifically, I would say, regarding the designation?
Comment. I would also agree with Mr. Kazazian. I think we should possibly add or modify the language to a position versus an individual. So one or two additional positions that would be appropriate that can approve these transactions. I think that would suffice.
So what you're suggesting is instead of "or his designee," it could say something like GWP General Manager,
correct,
or something like that?
I wouldn't support that, but I do agree with the public speaker that there should be some amended language. I'm concerned that we overload any given individual by reducing the flexibility of the Director of Finance to designate someone from within a range of people. If these trades need to be made fast, I think that we're going for maximization of flexibility on a day-to-day basis, and I think we limit that flexibility if we rein it in so much that we have only one designee. And I would suggest, but I get I'm in accord with the basic sentiment, and I was wondering if maybe the city attorney could go back to your comment when I expressed reservations about the designee language myself. You said that the designee, I thought I heard you say something about the designee would be subject to overall risk management policy that is in place. So could we amend this motion to make sure that the designee is determined from within those persons who, is there a set of such people that are within our risk management written policy?
Yeah, so it would be someone within the finance function and the credit function of the city. What I might suggest is instead of a title, you might have him, or you might say as someone he designates in writing, essentially, and that's within that finance function.
It
I
still
think
leaves
if
it
you put a
open.
title, then, what if the titles change?
Well,
What
not
if
single
a position's
title.
vacant?
Titles, department, whatever, but not as open. Basically, I think the whole point of the suggestion was to fix it to a specific department or individual or group of individuals that have certain authority and understanding of what's being done.
Mr. Zern?
Mr. President, members of the Commission, I certainly understand your concern. What we usually use this is in the frame of if the finance director isn't here. Likely is that Mr. Campbell will be the designee to do this, but in the case both of them aren't here, then what happens? Usually the finance director will leave somebody in charge of his operations when he goes on vacation or jury duty or whatever it may be. So this just gives us a little more flexibility. It's conceivable we could list. It likely won't be my title because I'm a proponent of having the more independent outside financial folks looking inside instead of having inside GWP making those decisions. It makes me more comfortable. I can tell you that. Short of going back and in trying to get this done here, if we could designate the list of people that are in the risk policy, I think there's
Those people are
3 or 4 names on there, Christine.
those people are within the city's financial structure.
We would make sure it was limited to folks that are within the financial structure. I only hesitate because I don't know if Mr. Campbell's title has been included in there. See, that's.
Let's not do titles, but can't we have general language so that I would suggest a comma after the word designee, and then something along the lines of the designee to be selected from among the city's, and then fill in the blank, risk.
Energy risk manager, you could say?
Managers.
An
plural.
option might be a member of the Energy Risk Management Committee. Those are specifically
And who are those
identified.
people?
They're going to be familiar with, it's the utilities general manager, the city finance director.
So it does still come back to possibly the general manager.
Possibly.
And the finance director we already have.
But the reason I offer that as a suggestion is those are individuals that regularly deal with these issues and are familiar with them and at least have knowledge and are put in the position of making recommendations like this.
So we could say, or his designee from within the Energy Risk Committee,
Or is it called the Risk Management
Committee.
Program Committee?
Whatever
Is there a
that,
committee?
whatever the,
It's the Energy Risk Management Committee, and I think that's a good approach with the caveat that you'd want it to be a voting member because internal audit and city attorney's office also sit on that committee, but would not want to have that role.
From
or
among
his,
the-
or his designee from among voting members of the Energy Risk
Risk
Committee,
Management.
Management Committee.
See, I would oppose to a certain degree because, as I heard before from Commissioner Dendler and the city attorney, is that there is a strict separation between GWP and finance just to keep that wall. And if we include any designee who are part of GWP, I think I would oppose that amendment. So I would suggest that it would be the director of finance or his designee outside of GWP. And then you can add whatever other
But not
managers.
to include.
From among voting
Among the
members
voting, but
of
outside of GWP.
non-GWP
Right.
voting members of Energy Management Risk Committee.
So you've
Have
got.
we narrowed it down to one
let me-
person now?
okay, yeah.
That's what I was worried about, I
Let me
think.
tell you who's on that committee. So you've got the GWP general manager, the assistant general manager of
So they'd be
supply,
excluded, technically.
GWP risk manager, GWP assistant general manager of finance, and a city manager representative.
And some of
That would
them,
really leave the city manager representative at that point.
and
So who is
Mr.
that?
President, some of those titles are obsolete. They no longer exist. How about if we structured something, because the finance group is wholly under the chief financial officer of the city, the director of finance, although they are specifically assigned to the water and power. What if we said from within the designated Glendale Water and Power financial management team or or financial financial management group. So that would be Mr. Campbell and his staff within GWP who are strictly finance folks and who actually work for the director of finance, not for the general manager, or are they employees of the utility?
But you know, how, I don't mean this to come out the way it's going to sound, but how low level of an employee can that go to?
It would probably be just Mr. Campbell and maybe one other. I wouldn't see it going any further than that. To be honest with you, I personally think we could get by if we said the director of finance or the budget administrator of GWP. And if that begins to cause us any heartburn anywhere and we're missing a trade, we'll come back to you. But I think between Mr. Elliott and Mr. Campbell, they'll be here all the time. I'm sure they would assure me of that as well, right? But Eric doesn't have any vacation time coming.
You're
so
trying to get away from GWP.
Yeah, I thought Mr. Campbell would report directly to you, Mr.
No. Mr. Campbell reports directly to the finance director.
Okay.
All of the financial management in GWP is now under the chief financial officer. I do not have direct supervisory responsibility for any of those.
They're part of your management team, but they're
part of the management team, but they report
They're
to
not
the
direct
to the
reports,
CFO. So Mr. Campbell he works directly for Mr. Elliott.
That's acceptable to me. I'd also like to make the language more gender neutral, director of finance or his or her designee.
His or her, is the
Designee,
budget director?
Budget administrator,
The specific title.
GWP.
Title.
Yeah.
You don't want it.
Yep.
Okay.
It's finance administrator.
Oh, I'm sorry. Finance administrator. I cut him down a little
Everyone's so new that we don't even know each other.
It's a lot of change going on.
So
Okay.
that is a change from when Mr. Fox was here, when he reported directly to Mrs. Steiger.
bit. Yes, you're correct, Mr. Yao.
How recent is that change?
That took place when Mr. Fox left. So shortly after his departure, and some other internal evaluations that were conducted, the decision was made by the city manager to shift that back to the finance department. Mr. Campbell is essentially assuming that role that Mr. Fox had, but he's assuming it as an employee of the finance department
Of
and
the
not
city.
the utility.
Okay.
Mr. President, I move the motion as amended.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, motion carries. I just wanted to clarify, do we have to vacate the room at 5? Is that the case, or is the issue that we are losing staff for another meeting?
We do have to vacate at 5, I believe. Is the case.
Yes, there's another meeting coming in?
Yes, on
at 5?
both, Mr.
Okay.
President.
Okay. Then I wanted to ask a question before I decide which agenda item to jump to, because we're obviously not going to get through everything in 13 minutes, and we still have comment cards, too. Electric rate schedule, is that to discuss the electric rate increase schedule? Is that what that is about?
That's correct, Mr. President, members of the Commission. Mr. Boeg was just going to come up and give you what our plan was to move forward all the way up to and including presentation to the Commission first and then the Council.
Okay, so I would suggest that we jump to 5D, as we might not get to the other agenda items, and that is a critical, time-sensitive agenda item.
5D, electric rate schedule. Ramona Buek.
President Armenian, members of the Commission, this will be a short presentation. I just want to give you a timeline of what we're looking at. Our goal, should there be a rate increase, is to have one effective September 1st. And to meet that goal, we are planning, or in fact, the reason we're leaving early is our first advisory committee. We formed an advisory committee of members from the different factions or different groups of the community to present to them what our challenges are. And that begins tonight. And we meet with them every 2 weeks until July 12th. And as you may have seen, there was a special meeting that we requested on July 19th. The findings, including recommendations from the advisory committee, will be presented to you on July 19th with the hope that we'll get some support, and that by July 24th, we'll have the first introduction for reading by the City Council, with the second reading or adoption on July 31st, so that we're looking at the September 1st effective date.
Could you repeat the dates again, just because you went through it pretty fast?
All right,
So September 1st is the goal, is a target date, so working back from that?
Working back from that, July 31st will be when we hope the City Council will adopt it. It will be first read and introduced on July 24th. July 19th is when we will present to you, the Commission, our recommendation for the rate increase. The dates July 12th, June 28th, and today, June 14th, will be our meetings with the advisory committee from the members of the community.
Sorry, I got July 12th. What were the other two for the advisory?
July 12th, June 28th, and June 14th, which is today.
Okay. Can you outline who is on that advisory committee?
I don't have their names in front of me, but we have representatives from the Homeowners Association, from commercial customers, the hospital, I believe the school district opted out, and also from a low-income group. So all members of the community will be represented, including the industry. We have somebody from Disney that's coming.
And the Homeowners Association, are you specifically referring to the Homeowners Coordinating Council?
Yes. Well, they designated somebody. We approached one of the homeowners association member
Within that Coordinating Council?
That's correct.
The reason I'm asking is because not all homeowners associations are members of that Coordinating Council, so unfortunately I don't consider that council as representative of all homeowners associations. You should keep that in mind.
Right. Yep.
And I think when we get to the point of input in the process, I think we should definitely notify a broader group of people to allow them the opportunity to come to the commission and express their opinions in these matters.
Okay, and I'd be remiss if I don't mention that Mr. John Miller, an ex-commissioner, is going to be chairing the advisory committee. So he'll be with us to walk us through the process, knowing that he represents the interests of our citizens.
Okay, could you, as a follow-up item, communicate to the commission members who the actual members of the advisory committee are, just so we're aware of that?
We'll send that list to you as part of your package.
That'd be great.
I wanted to remind the commissioners that, as I indicated a month ago or so to the administrative office, I have a pre-planned vacation, and I will be out of the state on July 19th. I'll miss that.
Okay, any other comments from questions? In this process, Mr. Dobek, I'm not finished. In this process, so you're going to be gathering input from this advisory committee, but then in terms of, is there any need for legal review in terms of whatever will be proposed?
Absolutely. Our office will be drafting the ordinance and reviewing it from the beginning.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. We do have two comment cards. So Mr. Herbert Milano.
GW President Armenian and members of the Commission, my name is Herbert Milano. I'll make this fairly quick. I wanted a reminder concerning the fact that 70% or nearly 70% of the population in Glendale lives in multifamily housing. I'm an very active member of AGLA, the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. I never got any kind of information or invitation to participate in this. The second, I believe that there should be a significant information concerning demographic reports by zip code concerning the impact, right, of the history of the electrical rates on zip codes that have been the lowest with the lowest per capita or family income, that it should be included as part of these discussions. And third, that there is an item that has been pending your consideration. It's a legal item that I hope Ms. Dentler may have a chance perhaps to give some input. I'm going to leave it with you. It has to do with Government Code Section 54999, and it continues on. This has to do with the fact that schools, colleges, and other public entities cannot be charged for the capital expenditures that the GWP imposes, but rather the general cost of providing the electricity. I believe the city has been in violation for many years, and there was a a fairly significant judgment against the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power in regard to that. I'll leave this so that you can get a copy to all of your commission members, and that this be considered as part of those discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. Mr. Kazazian.
My name is Aram Kazazian. The reason I wanted to speak on this subject matter due to the fact that the advisory committee was not formed properly. The Homeowners Coordinating Council has very few, there's about over 50 homeowners groups in Glendale. Only 17 of them belong to Homeowners Coordinating Council. A lot of them had dropped out, like our association of 549 homes dropped out from there. Rosemont dropped out, and quite a few of them dropped out from the last year because of some internal problems. So what happened, even the Apartment Owners Association, I called and asked them if they were informed. They didn't receive a notice, which is a big group of all the different apartments, so they should be represented. And Homeowners Coordinating Council, I asked them to see if I can get on that committee. They were also nitpicking, and they would not let certain people on it that know more about it, has more information on the rate structure, and try to keep it out of it. So there's some problems in here. We need to add to that people from the Apartment Owners Association, and also each group of homeowners association, there are like over 55 of them, maybe they should be able to provide like 3 different or 4 different individuals in the advisory committee too, and that's what it should be done. So it's not done correctly. It's a problem, and we need to correct that as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kazazian. Mr. Zavos.
I'll be brief. I heard about the makeup of the advisory committee, and I want to amplify some of the comments already made. My homeowners association, which is very active, we've just completed a survey for the largest historical district in the city of Glendale.
Which?
Ross Moyne Mountain Homeowners Association, a historical district of 500 homes, and gotten 350 signatures on that petition. We haven't been informed. We're not members of the coordinating council. And we were. I remember one association had 2 members. It was an association, but that homeowners association consisted of 2 people. So I really am not trying to say that the coordinating council shouldn't be represented, but I'm not certain that the coordinating council represents a number of homeowners association, not only who represent a number of homes, but have substantial membership. Emerald Isle is one, Ross Moyne Mountain is another, Peliconey is another. Associations with large memberships and active associations who are not members of the coordinating council.
Thank you, Mr. Zavos. I do have a question, Mr. Zern, and that is with regard to this process. With the water rate increase, we actually ultimately ended up going around and having actual forums with community members, randomly chosen in different neighborhoods to get input into the process. Is there going to be similar type of outreach that will happen, or is it only this advisory group and then straight to council?
Mr. President, members of the Commission, at this time we had set it as just the advisory group we would go through, but I've been discussing with staff the concept that we would possibly take this to homeowners groups or other groups in between. It's in trying to get that pretty tight schedule together. We used a representative body, and by no means, it's what we believe is a manageable group that represents the interests of the broader community that they're involved in. Whether we don't have every homeowners group, we have a homeowners president. He's representing homeowners in general. It's actually not the Homeowners Coordinating Council. The Homeowners Coordinating Council could not sit on this committee, so we went with a president of an individual homeowners association as a representative.
Which homeowners association?
Northwest.
My comment would be that the speaker's points, I think, some of them are well taken, but as I recall, it wasn't our commission that set up the advisory committee. We weren't asked to weigh in on whether there should be one or shouldn't be one. I think, there were That was a body created by City Council, and we sit here as a body to hear public input, but hearing public input on who should be on that advisory committee isn't really our jurisdiction because we didn't set it up. So I think it's fine for people to question and critique who's sitting on it, but it wasn't created by this commission, and it wasn't a creation of GWP management either. So
Correct.
I would encourage members of the public to go before that advisory committee and take it for what it is, as an opportunity, a forum to express community input, but it's not really we didn't create it, neither did GWP.
But I don't think those are open sessions. Those are invitation
So there won't
only.
be open
No.
sessions?
No,
They're not open sessions, nor are they Brown Act.
Well, that's a problem.
So that's the issue I'm lining up. I mean, I
saw that coming. You saw it coming the day we heard that it was created.
So I mean, I applaud the principle of creating it. I think that more thought could be put into how it is, the makeup of it, to make sure that it's more representative. The other opportunity, I think, could be, while there's a meeting today that's water under the bridge, I think that there's 2 other meetings coming up where you could include other groups, and I'd be happy to provide at least my personal input into how you get a more representative input, because I do think that we encounter a lot of trouble with the water rate increase because of the outreach efforts, and I think that an electric rate increase potential is going to be even more beneficial and important to inform people about the whole process as well as get their input on it, and I think to shortchange that part of the process is only going to create more problems, further on down the line. So it's, at the end of the day, like Commissioner Dentler said, that it was City Council's decision to form it. You guys are managing it in terms of GWP management, but at the end of the day, the process after those advisory councils are going to come to the commission level, and that's the point at which this commission will address it. But I highly encourage you to revisit, personally speaking, highly encourage you to revisit the makeup and perhaps expand it a little bit further than what it is today.
And Mr. President, I think the concept of separate but focused outreach efforts as well may in fact get us as much mileage. So I will go back and talk with staff about doing that in between or up to your July 19th meeting.
And let's avoid what we had happen with the water rates after we put so much effort into it, paid a consultant, had so many meetings, study session, and then at the very last minute, a small handful of large business interests popped up, and they had a legitimate point of view, but they hadn't raised it early on. So I think this is a key test for you as our interim general manager to, if you agree with this fast timeline that staff has proposed, I think there's a lot riding on your shoulders right now to help our community really understand the pros and cons of a rate hike, and to handle it really well so that we don't have that last minute derailment and having to, that last minute problem caused City Council to have to take it off the agenda, and it was quite delayed.
That's what we're trying to avoid.
Okay. Any other comments on that issue? Okay. We are out of time in terms of room, but we have to get through the oral comments, which we do have 2 speakers. The other items we will deal with under agenda forecast and have to reschedule. Is that appropriate?
We would need a motion to continue those items to the next meeting.
Okay. Should I
Continue public comment or not?
We cannot.
Okay.
Can we reduce it to 1 minute?
In Mr. Armenian's discretion, yes.
Before we continue, though, I would like to get through the oral comments, and then we'll do that. So I would like to limit the comments to 1 minute, since these speakers have spoken on multiple issues already, and this is general comments. So, Mr. Milano? I do apologize. I don't take the action lightly in terms of limiting public comments, but unfortunately we do have to vacate the room.
Commissioners and staff, my name is Herbert Molano. I'm making a recommendation that this commission take the time to review the powers that are now being designated to you under the municipal code. I see way too often too many issues that completely bypass this commission and go directly to the city council. I see too many times and too many instances where the representative of the city attorney stops you from consideration and debating issues that I think should be the purview of this commission. Evaluating what are the selection criteria and requirements of staff, for example. If you are, to some extent, overseeing the performance of the GWP overall, electric and water, it is individuals who make policy and decisions with it, and that should be part of the purview. That we are limited by the municipal code in this regard, I think is atrocious. I think it needs a consistent review. And the last comment has to do with regard to the false trade-offs that are being presented to us with regard to either services or rates, when the actual choice, I think, is between pensions that occur and the transfers that occur from the GWP. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. Mr. Kazazian?
A quick statement that the advisory committee, I think it's flawed. I think it was handpicked by council to designate certain people. Northwest Glendale only has 150 maybe homeowners group in there, and there were Peter Fuad is involved in it, and he's the one wants to increase the rates very heavily. He has already said that in public, so that's why they went to him. And the other homeowners groups did not get any chance to even get involved in it. So there's some problems over there, and I think it should completely be changed, or it should be open to the public, where the public has input in it, not do it behind closed doors, where nobody knows what's going on, in secrecy. That meeting in secrecy, it is a no-no in this town. Thank you.
Just to clarify, there will be a commission meeting on this topic, so that is the actual official public comment period on the issue.
Yeah, but that's tonight meeting on it.
No, that's an advisory committee.
Advisory, we cannot even attend that advisory committee.
On July 19th, the commission will be examining this issue in depth. It's a special meeting just for this topic, so I'd encourage you and anyone else that is interested to make sure that you attend that meeting, because that's the meeting that will make the recommendation to council.
Thank you.
Thank you. But I do
I think
appreciate
the
the points.
speaker has a good point, though.
Yes.
You know, to do something of this significance to our community in a closed-door meeting doesn't. But we didn't create it, and we're not to blame for it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. Can we skip, we'll skip old business and we'll go straight to agenda forecast. So we have two items that we didn't get to, strategic plan and plane crash restoration, which was actually something I requested. It's not an urgent thing. I just wanted to just examine how it was handled, just from a perspective of learnings and any other information that might be pertinent to the operation of the utility. And the other one was the strategic plan, which is a quarterly kind of scoreboard, which is important as well.
So you would want to entertain a motion to continue those items to the next regularly scheduled meeting, or whenever you'd like to have those heard.
Yeah,
I will note that the quarterly risk management update is coming up again in August, so
Yeah.
close to the next quarter.
So if everyone can be looking at your agenda forecast. So the one question I have is, I know we have the special meeting on July 19th. Do we have our regular meeting on July 2nd?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So we're talking about July 2nd. Right now, we have customer service update, NERC WEC compliance program, water department update, hedging versus spot market purchasing, and then smart grid update, which is a pretty full agenda. I think we would have to consider bumping something. I don't want to overschedule again. I don't want to do what the airlines do, which is overbook. I think the plane crash, is flexible.
Crash happened,
Happened,
it's
and
going to
it's-
be
yeah.
there to analyze in perpetuity.
Yeah. So maybe I also wouldn't want to have it go all the way out to October, because then we won't remember anything. So maybe I would propose that we move the plane crash agenda item to the August 6th meeting. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay.
Well, we need, I'm sorry to be procedurally picky, but we need someone besides yourself to move that, if we're going to.
I'll move, we move
Oh, okay.
the plane crash topic to the August meeting.
Second that.
Okay.
All those in favor?
I have to do a full
Aye.
vote? Okay. I thought it was just two.
Because you're continuing it from this agenda,
Okay,
that's
got
why.
it.
We
Okay.
can move all those agenda items to a future meeting, and then the president can pick which meeting to set. Can he?
Sure.
Yeah, so.
So if we can
I
have a
move to-
motion along those lines.
Do that, I will move, that
Yeah,
sounds like
move
you'd
to
like
have the remaining agenda items be moved to a future meeting.
To be set by the president.
By the
Is there a
president.
second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, now that I'm authorized, we'll move the plane crash to the August meeting for now, and then the strategic plan, we have another one in August, so we could either defer to just have the August one, because I don't think we need it in both months.
Up to you.
Any input on that? Or we could bump something that's in July to the following month.
May I suggest the hedging versus spot market? I know that's an item of interest to the public and to this commission, but we just heard that there's going to be an internal audit of the trading group, and this pertains to that, so it might make sense to defer that until that occurs.
Yeah, I think we put that on as just a placeholder because we were expecting that process would be done. Would that be done by August, do we think? Or should we move it further out?
Mr. President, that might be a little tight, and I think to expand on that somewhat, I have directed staff at several levels to take a look at this particular operation, include from the internal audit level, Mr. Bell as an independent source, Mr. Campbell with his experience. I was hoping to compile that all into a single report, which we had expected to take to council sometime 3 to 4 months, so it would sometime before that we would bring it to you.
So let me suggest then that we move that to the October agenda where it's pretty late right now. So that takes care of what we didn't get to today. We also discussed earlier in the meeting about putting something on the agenda in terms of the 90-day assessment that Mr. Zern, you're doing. So if we look at that, then that's either the September or October meeting.
60 days from now, actually. Technically.
Yeah, technically started. So
30 days. So.
That might move a little bit, but okay. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just.
So are we talking
October.
August or the September 24th?
I think September is more realistic.
All right. So anyone want to make a kind of propose that and make sure there's a second commissioner?
Make a motion to have a 9-day assessment by the Manager Zern in October.
October or September?
I'm sorry,
September 24th.
September 24th.
Seconded.
Okay.
We're good. We don't need a motion.
Yeah, we don't, I know. Okay. Any other agenda items? Okay, like I said, we do have the July 19th special meeting, and that's about, that will be dedicated to the electric rates. Commissioner Dentler and Commissioner Yao, you will be somewhere else other than here. So that will be myself, Commissioner Jemian, and Commissioner Chan.
I move to adjourn.
Okay. Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We're adjourned.